Welcome to part 2 of episode 18 of Boosted Rolls. In this part, we are going to talk about Oblivion changes, Theme Force remix, and we are going to give you spoilers for 2 Theme Forces. I know most of you are here for those, so I'll jump straight into the first one, which is Primal Terrors. Simon?
To sort of cut through the chaff, there are not many changes to Primal Terrors. In fact, there are almost no changes at all. The specific changes are that you can now add a Forsaken as a free option, which you couldn't do before. You could take them, but you couldn't make them free. In addition to that, we've lost the 2 inches extra deploy, as almost every theme which had it has done. And then obviously the new requisition system applies. So the major impacts of that are that you can now take Blightbringer and Golab together without suffering the loss of the 3rd free card. And that was a big deal in the past, and I'm sure it will have an impact. But in addition to that, it also allows for this possibility of an Absalonia type list where you take one of the Abbeys, a full beast loadout, and then a couple of Hellmouths and some support, namely Forsaken and probably some Spell Martyrs. And it allows you to run the sort of the beast lineup, but with your Hellmouths that you get for free, with Amok, in case he particularly benefits your Warlock, so you might see a little bit more Warlock variety, who knows. And so that's what we've got. I've put together a couple of little sample lists in case anybody wants to try these out. They're just some little thoughts about what you could run. So for example, to take the Blightbringer and Golab thing, you could try something like Animag with Amok, Blightbringer and Golab. 2 Spell Martyrs, maximum unit of Chosen, maximum unit of Warmongers with Gorag, 2 Hellmouths, and 2 minimum units of Rotwings. If you haven't run minimum units of Rotwings with Animag, you are missing out. The other option I came up with is just a little switch around of Callus 1 list, so Jake's original K1 list, which is Callus 1, Amok, Blightbringer, and Golab again. 2 Spell Martyrs, 1 Gremlin Swarm, a minimum and maximum unit of Chosen, a minimum and maximum unit of Birds, and double Hellmouth. So that all sort of fits together, gives you a slightly weaker feat, and a couple less Chosen, but gives you Golab, and with Golab and access to a damage buff, namely Ignite, you can do some scary things. It also throws in a Gremlin Swarm, which is quite nice. And to follow the Absalonia sort of line of thinking regarding Primal Terrors, and this is sort of the more new stuff available in the theme, you could have a look at Absalonia 2 with Amok, Golab, Proteus, Carnivian, Seraph, 2 Neraphs, 2 Forsaken, 3 Spell Martyrs, and double Hellmouth. Having Golab in an Absalonia list is frightening. He's probably our best character Warbeast, and to have him under Absalonia is amazing. Proteus is very meta at the moment in general. He is one of the few answers to Clockatrices. He is superb into Tharn in terms of if he gets there and is able to put his output out. Obviously that's on you whether you can make that work. And Amok has a tiny nice little synergy with Abbey that you might not necessarily need the Martyrs, and you might choose to change the Martyrs out for a Feral Geist, for example, or a Gremlin Swarm or whatever. I like having Spell Martyrs with Abbey too, but Amok does increase your spell range by 2, which means that Abbey's personal threat with Hexbolt is a little bit further, and you can keep her a bit safer, especially with Reposition 5 available. So there are some very cool options available. One thing I would say is I've played quite a bit of Legion. I've played almost exclusively Primal Terrors for about a year, and I don't think this changes a massive amount. I think the biggest change would be the potential for this Abbey 2 Primal Terrors list, and maybe Golab in Callus 1 kicks it up a notch, but I don't think you're going to see any huge changes in Primal Terrors at this time. Anyone got any thoughts on Primal Terrors they want to share?
Yeah, I've got a few thoughts.
Go.
My first is I'm not surprised the theme force hasn't changed very much, and I'm quite pleased because I think it is a strong theme force. Like, it's popular in Legion. I know that some people still struggle to deal with it. It gives you a lot of really great options, and it's very well internally balanced, where pretty much everything that is available in the theme is good and worth taking.
Yes.
So I definitely think it was a candidate for one of those themes that didn't need to be changed, and some people might have even said is one of the stronger themes and maybe should be nerfed slightly. So I'm not surprised that it hasn't changed much. I'm really pleased that they removed the 2-inch deployment. I know this isn't exclusive to this theme and that they're doing similar across the board, but I think it helps especially take the sting slightly out of Callus, where his plan to just run up the field and jam you out of a scenario is a little bit less effective, and I appreciate that. So I think that's all really good. One of the things that I really like about this theme, now that you can take a more even distribution of beasts and units, is in addition to what you mentioned, which is being able to take Golab with the Blightbringer, which is great. And that's kind of like a variation on a traditional build you would have seen before the change. And going all the other way with Absalonia, I think you can consider this build for more combined arms options. And I know these casters aren't necessarily the strongest in the stable, but some things to think about that might be worth exploring. Thagros 1, traditionally not great in this list because it really wants a Blightbringer as its only beast and he can't bring it back. Well, now he can take more beasts with options to return them, and he can apply his effective survivability buff to Chosen as well as give by survivability buff I mean the -2 strength, but he could also give them Fog of War. He could give them Draconic Blessing. So he's actually a pretty good Chosen caster, but now he can take the battle group he wants. And you could see a really interesting list that has something, I have no idea if the points work, by the way, but has something like Blightbringer, Typhon, maybe Golab, and 2 units of Chosen. Maybe Golab is too much there. Maybe you just have to have Typhon, Blightbringer, Chosen. But you could do a list like that, and it might be really interesting.
I think. All right, okay. So to go through, I'm going to sort of go through in order with the things that you said. In terms of the various pieces in Primal Terrors are all good and available and playable. I agree with the exception of one, which is the Blighted Ogren War Spears. So they are simply almost never compelling in the face of the alternatives, namely Warmonger's Chosen or Rotwings.
What about when they've got Draconic Blessing to double dip on their assault and charge attacks?
Well, they already could do that with Animag and you still didn't take them. So in other words, I agree with everything except that I think War Spears need a little bit of love in the dynamic update to give them a place, to give them something that they can do. They really don't need much. They're so close and they're so cool. But they do need a little love. Losing 2 inches, I agree. Callus 1, it made him a bit oppressive. I don't have a problem with that. I think also, like, I've been having this discussion with other people, and I think that my Hellmouth positioning particularly is designed to do one thing, which is keep them alive. And so I tend not to deploy them at 24 inches, even if we could. And so I don't see it as a huge nerf. However, they are very terrain dependent, and sometimes that terrain is 2 inches further away. And so I think one thing they could have considered doing was moving the +2 deployment only to Hellmouths.
Come on. You're advocating for special treatment for Hellmouths? Don't be ridiculous.
I mean, this would make a number of people sad, and I think that is the largest benefit of the change. And it would make me very happy. So my advocation is for +2 deployment back only on the Hellmouths.
Okay, well, the fact you mentioned Hellmouths just reminds me how happy I am that 2 inches has been removed, and I think it's a great reason why they did it.
It's made me a little sad, and I'd like it back. Thank you very much. As for your Thagros list, I think that's a very cool idea and worth mentioning that his -strength aura doesn't just protect Chosen in the way that, for example, Callus 1's Unyielding aura does, but also protects your beasts. And that's quite special because we didn't really have that in Primal Terrors before. I do think, however, you might, because of the increased points spent in beasts, and I think you probably would end up taking Typhon and Golab, because they're just too good to pass up on. That you might not take the Blightbringer because you might not get enough ogres in the list to get the mathematical benefit needed from the aura.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you know what? I think that's fine, right? Because it makes for a really fast list that is still kind of tough enough.
I think you just have bodies. You have serious amounts of bodies in a similar way. I mean, there used to be the Thagrosh 1 triple Warmongers list, right?
Yeah. With 2 free cards, Blightbringer and a Golab, right?
Yeah, but I think in this case you drop the Blightbringer, give up on the double dipping on the armor, like the plus armor minus strength. You give up on the double dip and you simply say, I've got lots of bodies and a couple of very nasty beasts that are coming back, and you go from there.
I mean, and that's actually plays quite differently, right? And it doesn't have that problem of having this big anchor in the middle of the list that is the Blightbringer.
Yeah, it doesn't give them, it doesn't give them a big potato to shoot at if they've ever got any guns.
Yeah. So just as an example, this obviously isn't the list you'd build, but you could have 75 points is Thagrosh, Typhon, Golab, double max Chosen, double max Warmongers.
Yeah, so then you've got double Hellmouth and Amok as your free options.
As freebies. You've got no UAs or anything. You've not got any of the utility solos, so that's probably not your final build. But it's the kind of thing you could think of.
Yeah, it sounds like you're going to be about 6 points short there then, because you're going to need Amok, you're going to need Gorag, you're going to need double Hellmouth, and then you're going to need a couple of Spellmarters just as disposable flag solos. But you're really not far off a very... sadly, I didn't come up with that idea before the show, so I didn't get to throw the correct points in, but I'm sure people can work it out.
And I think without the Blightbringer, you can make a pretty effective cloud wall. So Thagrosh can kill tentacles in front of him. That's 2 clouds.
Yeah.
Then you add Swampgober's Bell Screw that gives you AoE 5 or AoE 3 cloud. Then you can add Mire with the Bull Snapper or with the Swamp Troll if you want Consume, which is kind of useful ability now.
Yeah.
And Mire adds 2 clouds to the mix. So now you have 4 AoE, 3 clouds, and maybe AoE 5. And that should cover most of your army, and you can hide Golab behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do some cool stuff. And Golab is that kind of model who you really want to commit and do a load of work, but you're always scared that he'll just die in retaliation. And so being able to bring him back with the feat is very, very nice.
Well, the fact that you can go in, murder some stuff, reposition, sprint, whatever, and then even if they get to him, which they're going to have to put some serious work into doing, he's back. Yeah. And he's back and providing his Grievous aura.
Exactly.
And eating corpses if he wants to be. I mean, he'll be on full health, so that's kind of neutered, but,
Yeah. And Entropic Force aura is kind of important in the current meta, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what the current meta is, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the thing about this new Primal Terrors list is... I think I'm not going to say this is definitive, but you could argue that Chosen and Hellmouth are 2 of the best things going in Legion.
Yep.
And this list lets you take those and then do whatever you want with your battle group. And I think there's a lot of casters who might be interested in that. Not just Thagrosh, but if they ever come back into style, things like the Veils, who...
Fianna.
Yeah.
Fianna as well.
Fianna for sure. With her feat is fine on Chosen. I think you can do a lot of casters that can do a really interesting list we haven't seen before in Legion that is playing fast and hard hitting, but is using cavalry, aggressive melee cavalry with beasts. And that could be really cool.
Yep. I mean, I've considered a little bit of Callus 2 stuff as well. I mean, I used to play Callus 2 Primal Terrors anyway. You can start to think about that a little bit. But I think he's actually probably more comfortable in Children of the Dragon now. There are some cool lists because of the release and big changes in those themes. But today's the day for Primal Terror, so we'll stay on that topic for now.
What about Thagrosh 2?
Well, I mean, his problem was never the themes. His problem is that our beasts are horribly, horribly overcosted, and that his card is pretty damn good. He's like a big, hard-hitting heavy himself. He's tricky to kill. He's become trickier with Sacrificial Pawn. He's cool as hell. But the problem is that all of our beasts are nonsense. Their stat lines are nonsense. Their price is nonsense. There's no... it's dreadful.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but... I mean, basically, I think what you could do with him is something similar to what you said with Absolonia, right? Because with Manifest Destiny, he wants a large battle group, but he's also got Dragon's Blood, which is really good on Chosen. So he could play a list where maybe he has one unit of Chosen with Dragon's Blood, and then a bunch of Beasts and 2 Hellmouths.
Yeah. The problem with that is that, like, you're paying the 22-point Beast package tax from Legion, namely a Seraph and double Forsaken. And in the same way that, you know, Scorn are always obviously paying for all their Rush guy and the Beast handlers, and they always complain, you know, whenever anyone says anything in Scorn is busted, they say, oh, but we have to pay 20 points in support package, yeah. Where, you know, Legion has the same thing, only it's nowhere near as good.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd say is there might be an interesting dynamic when you have one unit of guys with Dragon's Blood that are really hard to kill. That might mean that you don't need to win the threat range game, and you don't need things like Seraphs, because it might just be you can have your Chosen go in and block positions, and they can't necessarily be killed by things like infantry shooting, right?
Yeah.
And they might require the commitment of heavies to dislodge, at which point you can have like 4 or 8 points of Chosen being your opening trade piece rather than a Legion heavy, and then have your heavies go in as that second line to retaliate against the models that have had to be committed to kill the Chosen.
Yeah, this is basically the line of thinking that I've been following more recently, is just saying, I don't think in the current meta you can afford to always pay the Seraph tax, and our threat ranges are no longer as impressive as they were, and a lot of other people are able to match them more. So you need to look at other ways of engaging, and Chosen are most certainly one of those ways. Hellmouths, of course, are the other way. If you can drag somebody in, tasty. People don't tend to give you that, but you know, you can dream.
Sure.
Any thoughts on Primal Terrors, Tomasz?
It's going to be hard to say anything without just echoing what you guys already said, but personally, I'm really excited we might see Primal Terrors with not only Callous One or maybe Animag. It's a very well-designed theme force, and because of the limitations and because you could abuse certain rules, it lacked the diversity it needed. And when I say it's a very well-designed theme force, I also mean externally balanced theme force. I think it took Privateer Press a while to find the power level they want their theme forces to be at and design structure they want them to have. Primal Terrors is the prime example of that theme force where I think they are happy with the power level they've reached and design structure they've created. This is why we don't see much change in the theme force, and it seems like they've used this theme force as a benchmark for the future. This is why Primal Terrors is still competitive versus most meta lists and things that went through CID later. It just lacks the diversity within the theme force, which puts the limitation on them to maybe win a tournament or things like that. So I'm very happy for Legion players to get that diversity, because I know how it feels having played Bones of Warburrows exclusively for a year.
Yeah, I mean, I think I share a lot of that sentiment. I mean, one of the things I particularly share is you mentioned that Primal Terrors was a good power level for a theme. And that, you know, we might hope to see things balanced around that level. And I think that exactly what, you know, to link back into what Patrick said, which is that it's a very well internally balanced theme. You know, a lot of the models, almost all, with the possible exception of War Spears, are really takeable. You can take them in various, you know, ways, and now they've opened up the options even more, because before the lack of Blightbringer plus Golab was annoying. But you've got all that, and I think that that's great. But I think that then, after that, the things that were then released were quite a bit above that power level. So Judicators, Clockatrices, Devourers Host, and these sorts of things. And that was a real shame for Legion, because they were in a really strong spot. Primal Terrors was a really well-developed and strong theme, and I think it still is. But it hasn't changed much. Simply everything's changed around it a little bit. And maybe some of these openings up and some of these possibilities will see it sort of pop back up, and having a more legitimate off list to threaten people with so they can't just choose their anti-Primal Terrors list will be really important as well. So I'm excited, and let's see what Legion can bring. So that moves us on to the second theme, and Tomasz, I'll let you have the honours. So tell us about Devourers Host.
Sure, so let me start with the army composition for those who don't have the document in front of them. We can bring Circle Warlocks without any limitations, cough cough, Wormwood in Secret Masters, cough cough, Living non-character war beasts, Getterics, Loki, Farm models and units, Deathwolves, Shifting Stones, Gallows Groves, Lord of the Fist, Circle Structures, and the first thing we see, the first change we see, is the Primal Archon being in the army composition. That means that we can bring max field allowance and still take our minion solo.
Yeah, I hadn't understood that. I was really interested when you mentioned it, when I think Patrick mentioned it earlier, and I was just like, wow, really? Okay, that's cool. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially if they manage to make Primal Archon something that we actually want to take. Let me move to requisition options, and that is 1 Circle Command attachment, 1 small or medium based solo, 1 Wolf Rider Champion solo, which I know many people are going to be happy about because there were some rumors we might lose it, and a new requisition option that's becoming a standard for Circle, which is 3 Gallows Groves. And moving on, the last thing are special rules, so those are the theme benefits. And the first benefit is each model in this army that can gain corpse token begins the game with 1 corpse token. So that hasn't changed. And the second benefit is 1 Farn Bloodweaver unit in this army gains ambush. So that also didn't change. I'll admit I'm very happy to see the Theme Force in the form it is, so almost unchanged. We know that we are going to see Lord of the Fist nerf. It was confirmed that his bird range goes down to 8 inches and his melee range goes down to 1 inch. But at the same time we get the requisition option of 3 Gallows Groves and we see the addition of Primal Archon. So you win some, you lose some, but overall it will make playing with and against Devourers Host much more pleasant experience, and just how the requisition options work for theme forces in general for list building, it means that the Devourers Host lists are also going to be more diverse and more exciting to build within. On the topic of list building, for example, now we can take the Well of Ouroboros and it doesn't feel like you are losing the free card just to get it back. You could fit Well of Ouroboros and get 3 free cards, but that was a real struggle because you had to keep your battle group within the Warlock's battle group points, because Crockpot is obviously an auto-include in the Theme Force.
Yeah.
So we are going to see more Wells of Ouroboros on the table, and it brings some diversity and versatility to the list, because you can bring a solo from outside of the game, outside of field allowance and outside of Theme Force limitation that can bring a certain tool that you need for the matchup. So that's kind of cool concept, like sideboard in Magic the Gathering, and I like that.
Well, in a way, it doesn't bring diversity because it puts a well in every list, doesn't it?
Yeah,
like we say it brings diversity, but I cannot think of a dev host list that doesn't slap a well in there. Like
maybe, but the diversity is inside the well. I mean,
yeah, sure. The diversity is in the well if you look carefully. Sure, okay. Oh, you haven't mentioned the thing I'm most excited about, which is Deathwolves. Deathwolves are back, baby.
Yeah, the Deathwolves are the command attachment to the well, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, so back before Farn CID, they were kinda auto-include in every Devourers Host list, just because how the theme benefit worked with the corpses. After Farn CID, when they changed the corpse benefit to 1 corpse for every model that can gain them, their value went down. They've gained advanced deployment, but you had to keep them back for the late game just so Crockpot could fill them up with corpses. Also, they didn't count toward free cards, so you either lose a free card or you were very limited with your battle group and options outside of 60 farm points. Now the issue is gone with the free cards because you can take them with no punishment, and with the WoW being able to deliver corpses to them regardless of proximity, it's so much better. So if your opponent brings living single wound not blast immune infantry to the table, you can shoot it with the well and fill them up pretty easily. And even if they don't bring that, you can shoot your own models and
topped up with their corpses, yeah. And if just to quickly check, I presume you cannot shoot 6 models and give out 2 corpses to each Death Wolf.
Oh yes, you can.
Jesus, you can give different. You can allocate corpses to different units in a single attack.
Yes, that's correct. And I think with AoE 4, you can clip maximum of 10 models, I believe.
I think we did the maths once, and I think it's 11.
Even better.
Yeah, but it's theoretical.
Yeah, so now I wouldn't consider it actually madness not to bring the crockpot, just to bring a unit of swamp shamblers, to shoot them turn 1, deliver 9 more corpses to your army, and then over the course of the game, fill the boker back with corpses from the well, and bring more shamblers.
Pat, what are your thoughts?
This is quite upsetting. So I'm a little bit, I am actually a little bit concerned. So I was very high on the previous theme force we talked about because I think it's a nicely balanced theme and this adds to more diversity. I think I have a bit of trepidation about this one, and I'm emphasizing this because I think actually other players will feel this maybe more strongly than I do, and I want to vouch for them. But Devourers host right now is at the top of the meta, and a lot of people feel that they can't handle it. And this theme force getting more options makes me really concerned that it will be very, very hard to handle. And it's already full of models that, frankly, are just a little bit too good. Like, it had a lot of models come out of that CID cycle that released all the most powerful stuff. And this discussion of, now we get to include 2 more units that are a bit too powerful, makes me wonder how a lot of the other lists are going to be able to keep up with this new bump in power.
Yeah, but I have good news. One of those overtuned models, probably the most overtuned, is going to get nerfed.
And the question of the day, does that turn him into a Wolf Rider solo for you, or do you still put him in the list? I think I still put him in the list, but I'm just wondering if you feel the same.
Yeah, he's still applying grievous wounds at quite long range, which is something missing in this theme force, or shall I say, missing compared to what the meta is forcing you to have.
Okay, so you're still taking him.
I think it would be unusual that you don't take him and 2 Wolf Rider solos as your 3 points. It's just so efficient.
I often don't find myself taking the second Wolf Rider champion.
Yeah, me neither.
Okay, fair enough.
Take one, yeah, sure, but I don't always find space for the second one because reasons, but just the way the points fit. I mean, I don't get me wrong. Wolf Rider champions are gold. I love them, but I think you still take Feast. I think the changes were great. I've been one of the people advocating Feast nerfs ever since he was changed. I've been shouting it from the rooftops. And I'm delighted that he was nerfed.
Yeah, I think it was a good move. I think he was definitely too strong. We'll see how these things go. I was quite annoyed with how strong the whale came out of CID. I was one of the people on the forums advocating for the fact that if it's a 10-point model that gives you a 5-point model, it's really only 5 points. Yep. But that argument didn't seem to go down very well. So we'll see how it goes. One of the things I think about this theme is because so much of the power is in the Tharn. Although you can, in theory, now have more war beasts, I don't think you'll see that in quite the same way as we just discussed with Legion and some other themes. I think people will be drawn to this theme if they want to have a good number of infantry that hit hard.
Agreed.
I agree, but not completely. I think the requisition options within the theme force open up both Chromax. So both of those warlocks wants to have a big battle group in order to maximize the value of the tools they have. So for example, Chromac 1 wants to have a Stalker because Stalker is a great wild aggression target. He wants to have a Getorix because Spiny Growth boosts his survivability, and also Getorix gets overtake from Bond and he becomes a monster, right? You probably want another war beast just so you maximize the value of the warpath, which affects only the battle group. Same story for Chromac 2. You want a Stalker just so you can use Chromac in melee and sprint back to safety. You want a Getorix because Getorix with Chromac is a monster and he still provides spiny growth. Also, Chromac's 2 feet affects only the battle group, at least the strength and arm bonus, so you want to maximize the value of that. And you might want to complement that with the models that only Devourers host provides you with. So, for example, Foreign Blood Shaman is really good on Chromac 1 because of Harmonious Exaltation, and really good on Chromac 2 because of Blood Sacrifice and Divine Inspiration for him. There's a Foreign Ravager Shaman, so both of those Chromacs can be affected by no knockdown aura. You can have Ravagers and Bloodweavers, which are really kind of self-sufficient units that don't necessarily need any support from the Warlock. So that really opens up an option for those 2 Warlocks to play in this Theme Force and not lose on free cards.
That's really cool. That would be really nice if that did happen, for sure.
Just before we move too far away from Pat's comments, I can hear a bubbling sound, and it's Paul Sheard's piss boiling. Regarding, and I think he would never let me live if we didn't at least have some retort to the fact that you said that Devourer's host is a particularly meta-defining strong list at the moment, and that it needed some nerfs. But we didn't go on to discuss. Okay, sorry. I may have put words in your mouth there.
Maybe I wasn't clear enough. I didn't say that I thought the old list needed nerfs. I said I'm concerned that it has received some buffs, and that is not the direction it needed to go.
Forgive me. I think I put words in your mouth. I don't think that's what you said, and I think you actually I misrepresented you there. Apologies. But to then not suggest, because first of all, I should say I agree. I completely agree with that. The Well being able to just be slammed into every list, Death's Wolves slammed into every list except maybe Iona because her feat doesn't benefit them. Various things like that are incredibly strong, and the fact that Feast was nerfed was fantastic, and I couldn't be happier about that. Aside from the fact that we're hearing rumours about further nerfs. So people are talking about Iona, people are talking about Stormraptor, people are talking about Ravagers. And yet we're hearing confirmation, as close as can be, that nothing's happening to the Clockatrice. That the Judicator went down up 1 point.
Yeah, that's a bit weird, isn't it? 1 point,
yeah,
what?
Yeah, that it's cheaper than a storm. Well, I'm so sorry, Signar. Oh my god. So that these, so I was desperately hoping that yes, Feast's getting nerfed, fantastic, let's do it. Let's bring down the Ravagers a little bit, wonderful. Let's bring down Iona if you particularly want to. I don't necessarily think you need to, but yeah, fine, do it. So long as we then have a look at Clockatrice, Judicator, Supreme Guardian, and I feel like I'm missing Judicator. And Harbinger, of course, my god, yeah, there we go, that's the one I was missing. And yet it sounds like those things aren't happening, and that free initiates with Harbinger are still cracking on, that Clockatrices are still getting to do their thing at unbelievable value, and so on and so forth. And I've heard the argument that Devourers Host and Circle in general are sort of eating a lot of the hate that maybe some of these factions aren't getting and should be. Scorn getting their new Minion War Beast stuff with some crazy Makeda 3 combinations. We don't know how that's going to go. But Scorn being in a pretty good place anyway. And yet Circle is the one taking the nerfs. And not just taking one, but taking 2 to Lord of the Feast and then potentially more. That really worries me. It really worries me that they're not doing these newer models because they are new, because customers have just bought them.
Mm-hmm. It's a really difficult problem to solve, right? Because I think there's general agreement along a big chunk of the community, whether we're right or wrong. I think a lot of people share the same point of view that you just expressed and that I expressed, which is there's a swathe of models that came out during a certain release window that are all a bit too powerful.
Yep.
And I've said on previous podcasts that I've been on that I think this is the fault of the community as much as the developers. And it becomes this point of everyone chasing, trying to be as good as whatever is best. If that makes sense, and saying, well, until we can beat the thing that's the best, our list isn't good enough, and this leads into this constant ramping up and up and up of power creep.
Yep.
Plus a couple of very ill-advised last-minute changes, like signs of portents on the Judicator or whatever. But the thing is, now that we have this problem, it's not easy to solve, because there's debate about whether or not this even is a problem. And there's debate about which units are too strong. And everyone has their own biases. And for sure, you won't think the stuff in your faction is too good, and you will think everyone else's is. You can say, well, let's just bring it all down together. But even then, we can't necessarily agree on what is it that needs to be brought down, how much by. And you're going to have this situation where if they do nerfs, it's probably not going to hit everything. But it's probably still going to be better for the game overall to nerf a few things than not, because still the vast majority of the models in the game, and I'm talking 99%, are fine. So it's still going to be better to nerf the things that are egregious than to say, no, let's leave them and let's buff everything else. That's not going to be practical.
I've been calling for that approach for longer than I can remember. I just, like, all the time I've wanted to just bring down the top few things. Stop trying to bring everything else up. But my goal isn't to sell models. So it's quite possible that it's a business model thing, and I totally accept that I'm inexperienced in that realm, and that perhaps they have reasons outside of just true game balance, which is where my focus lies, for doing those things. So, but I could just feel that if that side of the argument wasn't addressed, that some players, by the way, I should note that I don't particularly like Circle, that I don't want to be playing Circle, and that I am playing them because they are strong. So that's, let's just get that out of the way. I have no love for Circle, but I do feel like they are taking an enormous amount of the crap that's being sprayed around, and that some of that could be because the American meta is struggling to deal with it. And that's who Privateer Press directly hears from the most. And that a result of that, they're not meeting some European Grimkins, Harbingers, who are dangerous. As an example. But largely, it's a way of saying that I agree with you in a long and potentially unnecessary way. Yeah. Tomasz, any thoughts on that sort of topic before we move on?
I mean, I don't necessarily want to speak about how to balance the game, which models to nerf and how, because I'm not the designer, I'm not developer, and I know nothing about it. Even though I share some opinions with you, I'll just leave it. What I will say, though, on that topic is I'm really happy they've nerfed Lord of the Fist, and I think it's not only good for the game in general, but it's also good for Devourers host. And I want to go back to what Patrick said, that he's concerned about Devourers host getting bump in power level or diversity or whatever. And you were concerned because many players reported that they struggle to deal with Devourers host already within their faction. And I think part of the reason is that those factions had badly designed theme force, and it might be the reason why they are doing the remix, but also because Lord of the Fist. So they couldn't deal with him. They had to play suboptimally, and you could trade Lord of the Fist up to 6 times his points value, which is just crazy. So now they nerfed him, even though with the changes you might get more diversity, because you're not getting more. Like, you already could take Death Wolves and not lose a free card. You already could take the Well and not lose a free card. The changes just open up the options for you, and you can take both and not lose a free card. But you are, in terms of points value, you are not going to trade Lord of the Fist like you've traded him before. So even though you might end up with 4 to 5 more points in your army, you want to remove 15 or 20 points from your opponent's army, which just feels better for everyone.
It's good points. Let's see how it plays out.
Yeah, I just hope they don't go with the nerfs further at this point, based on the current meta, current power level, or champions and things like that, because nerfing the strongest and bumping the weakest might just rebalance things the other way around, right? And again, I'm really happy where we are now, and I'm really excited to play the game with what we have.
I think as you speak for a lot of Circle players, like you sort of represent a good number of Circle players, I would say. It's really great that you're excited, that you're happy, that I think that's also good, right? We don't want to just piss on a faction at any point. Yeah. And that's why I'm sort of really nervous that they might overdo it with nerfs if everything that's been rumoured and chatted about, and of course some of it's just whispers from people who have no idea what they're talking about, that's absolutely certain, I'm sure, but if they did just suddenly drop a handful of nerfs on Circle and nothing on anyone else, that would be concerning to me.
Yeah, but fortunately they have not confirmed any further nerf yet, and another point why I think Lord of the Fist nerf is good for Circle players, it's just the worst thing about Lord of the Fist is you had to listen to your opponent complain. Yeah, and it was annoying, It did not create a positive atmosphere around the game. Like, maybe if Lord of the Fist died early, then you had some positive reactions. But usually it was just negative, and negativity of your opponent affected you. So
I spent a lot of time apologizing for him.
Yeah.
Lord of the Fist activates, and I am sorry about this.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I liked some things about him. I think you could get some really creative plays from him, and I like having 2-inch reach on a Thresher. I would maybe leave that and take some other role from his card, like Death Powered or something like this. But I'm pretty sure Dev Team spent more time playtesting him with different variations of his rules than I or any other player did, because we are focused on how he currently is. So game is becoming better, and there are still some monsters I would like to see changed, but overall, looking at the bigger picture, it's all good.
That is a wonderful segue into the bigger picture. So moving away from Primal Terrors and Dev Host, I think we've kind of covered now. I think they're good to go. And hopefully, if anyone's got any more questions, feel free to throw them to us in Discord or whatever. But on to general Oblivion thoughts, feelings, excitement or lack of.
Yay!
So Tomasz or Pat, I don't mind. Whoever's feeling more excited, kick off. Tell me what your thoughts about Oblivion. What's happening?
I'm excited.
Go for it.
Are you excited, Tomasz?
I'm excited.
So I'm not. So I'm going to play the devil's advocate on this one, I think.
All right, you can go last then.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll kick in at the end there when everybody's all cheerfuled out.
So I'm excited for a few things. I'm excited for the core rules changes. The recent preview we had with the Jack Marshal changes, letting Warjacks shake while they're Jack Marshaled, indicates to me that they're really considering what opportunities they have to improve the rules, not just to make them more streamlined, but also to throw some balance tweaks in there and to let some less used models have more time on the table. So I think that's really good. I'm also excited for the new wave of releases, both in terms of Infernal models and in terms of new theme forces and Morrow models. We're going to have a lot of new lists hit all at a similar time, and a lot of them are going to be those wacky lists that let you play models that aren't normally in your faction, right? So suddenly Signar, Protectorate, Kador, Infernals, maybe some other factions I'm not thinking of, are all going to get to use models from different lists. And that could really change the meta a lot, because you're going to see a lot of combinations that you haven't seen before, all at the same time. And for sure, people are going to be excited to try them. So even if they're not great, you're going to see some weird stuff. And you're going to have to think, how's my Kador match up when they have Adjudicator? You know, how's my Signar match up when they're running a Conquest? Does it change anything? Mm-hmm. Maybe it does. So I think that's going to be really cool. And then on top of that, we've got a whole new raft of releases in the Mercenary and Minion slots. We've got the Archons, we've got the Hermit, and hot on their heels, we've got Riot Crest models, which all work for quite a lot of factions as well. And they're going to change existing lists. You know, and they're going to make it so even the tried and tested stuff maybe has some new tweaks and has different solos and different synergies, and maybe that has some small impact, or maybe it has some big impacts. So all of those changes at once, I think, is going to be really, really exciting, and it's going to lead to a very different meta.
Just can I press you a little bit on Riot Quest? So I'm. How do you feel about Riot Quest models being introduced to War Machine in terms of having, being put into the War Machine game despite originating in the Riot Quest game?
How do I feel about it?
Yeah.
I think that having more War Machine models is great, and whether or not you like Riot Quest, it's only a good thing if you get cool new models to play with in War Machine.
Cool. Okay. Yep. And Tomasz, you were also in the excited camp, so hit us with your thoughts.
So, again, I would second everything that Pat already said. And on top of that, I can add something personal. I don't play the game for a very long time, and there are still models I've never seen on the table. And I remember the excitement when I first started playing the game, when every time I approached the table, I saw something new. So I'm looking forward for that feeling again. I know for a fact that developers put a lot of effort to put all the character war beasts and warjacks back on the table, and I'm pretty sure I don't know and never seen probably around half of them ever being played. So I'm excited about that.
And if I echoed the same question regarding Riot Quest, would your answer be similar?
Yeah, just more models for War Machine.
And if I then ask about the Hermit of Hengehold and his latest rules, so if we consider him as a model that's being potentially released with little to no CID, and from what we know of him will be bonkers, and be only available via an expensive box set for a story-driven campaign that many people might not have interest in playing. Of course they might. What are your thoughts on that, Tomasz? And then we'll come to you, Pat, if that's all right.
Next question.
Okay. Pat,
I'll give you my thoughts on it.
Yeah.
So, I think making a model that is very powerful, only available in that way, is not a great business practice. And if that's the way that it does pan out, I think that it could leave some people disappointed for sure. I hope it doesn't pan out that way. There's several things that could happen to make that not the case. It could be that the rules change. We've seen plenty of times in CID where the final CID rules have not been the rules that go to print.
Yep.
And it could be that the rules change to make it an interesting and compelling choice that doesn't feel quite as ubiquitous.
Yep.
It could also change that the model is available some other way fairly soon.
Yeah.
Perhaps through an alt sculpt or something like that. And if either one of those things happen, I think there's nothing for anyone to complain about.
Agreed.
So I'm not going to worry about it yet because I think either of those is possible. Worst case scenario, if it plays out in the way you said and the model feels like a must-have for competitive players and is very expensive because of how it's made available, I think that's bad, but even that is a short-term problem because metas change and at some point the model will be available. So although I wouldn't love it, I also don't think it's the end of the world. And I'd add that with all of the Archons and all the Riot Crest models, there's an extreme amount of competition for that one mercenary or minion slot. So even if we think a model is very powerful, I don't think it's necessarily going to be in as many lists as people say that the Hermit will be in.
Yeah, as we might imagine. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you just said. I desperately hope it doesn't end that way. And as you say, there are many viable ways for that to happen. So we can remain hopeful that it doesn't go that way. Can I be grumpy yet? Is that all right?
Even grumpier?
Yeah. Oh, I've been holding back.
Oh, go for it. I have the edit button.
It's good, yeah. This is great. So whenever I go off on one, Tomasz just sort of comes to me afterwards and goes, "So the bit about where you went off on it for 5 minutes. Shall I just quietly edit that out?" Yeah, okay. I am also excited about Oblivion in terms of the actual changes. So I realise that that's rare from me. But I think the changes they're making to the game are great. I agree with the core rules changes. I think that's fantastic. And I think that the opening up of themes, that the requisition points was something that maybe should have been done longer ago. It's a great change to a lot of the game. Fantastic. I dislike Riot Quest quite intensely. Because I think it's yet another failed side project, probably, that draws attention away from the main game. And that these models that are being added into War Machine, I agree, new models in War Machine, fantastic. Just do that. Why devote this much time and distraction away from War Machine, which is such an amazing product, to create another side game? None of which so far have been particularly great.
To make money.
But the result of new models in War Machine, great. I know a lot of people have had issues with the sculpts being a bit wacky. I don't particularly care about the sculpts, so I'm on board with you. I think new models, new rules, changing the way that we can interact is great. But doing it via a side game, not delighted about that. Then onto the way that Oblivion has been released. And that is my biggest gripe, personally. So, especially regarding WTC, which is something I care about a great deal, and I know a lot of players do, including both of you. But I'm one of the grumpiest regarding changes close to the list lock date. And when I say close, people might say, "Oh, it's you got many weeks or even months." Well, I don't necessarily think that's true, and I don't think that's enough. So I prepare and have been preparing for months, and I'm sure many players have as well, and I know several players have. And so to suddenly stir things up at the last second isn't amazing. I realised that they tried to make some concessions. They tried to get involved with the WTC committee, and I'm really happy that they did that. I think that's a really positive move, and I'm delighted about that. But the effect of about a month before the list lock saying there are going to be huge changes in a month had a real impact around me. So it has effectively killed the local 4 metas, which I attend. And so now if I want to get competitive games, I need to go to Poland, and that's about 5 hours away. Whereas previously I could choose from Brno, Vienna, Klagenfurt, or Graz. And almost all of those metas have been killed by essentially everybody saying, look, the game's on pause. We don't know what's coming. We can't train. We don't even know what faction we're going to play. They've told us they're going to shake things up in a big way. And yet they've given us no indication of how that's going to play out. And then WTC have accepted those rules. So I tried to get games, my regular games with local opponents, and they just said, look, there's not really much point. I'm going to go and play X-Wing. And that really shocked me because, I was willing to just keep playing just to get games in, just because I love the game. But it had this effect, and I appreciate that hasn't happened across a lot of the UK, and it certainly doesn't seem to have happened in a lot of the US. But just to say that in Central Europe, and specifically my area, it's really had a massive negative impact. And so myself, I am grumpy about that because I think it could have been handled better. I would rather have either not known for longer or that it not happen directly before the WTC. Any disagreements, big ones, arguments, thoughts?
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on that,
cool.
And I don't agree with you. So definitely understand what's happened in your particular area is really unfortunate, and it sucks for sure. So agree with you on that. I wouldn't want it to happen, and it'd be great to avoid it. I do think the way Privateer Press has handled this release is perfectly fine, and in particular in regards to WTC. You mentioned you've been practicing for months. I don't think it's reasonable for a company to have major releases on pause for what would be effectively half of the year to impact that time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think that's asking for too big a concession. It's such a small minority of the player base, even though some of those people are quite influential. It's such a small minority of the player base that doing anything like that, I think, would be silly and bad for Privateer Press. I'd also add that for me personally, I'm really excited to play with the new changes.
I know a lot of people agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would be you and I obviously discussed this at length. We're on the same WTC team, Team England Lions, and we had to give feedback to the committee about what we wanted. So we discussed in detail the pros and cons.
Yeah.
And I understand the con is we're used to playing this way. We've practiced, and that practice value is diminished because the rules have changed toward the end of the period that we could practice, which is true. But I personally don't think that practice has no value. I think if you've played 200 games in the last 2 months, you're still going to beat the guy that's played 50 when you both have a month to prepare the new rules. I think that's just going to happen. And therefore, I don't think it really matters. I think whoever's practiced more still has an edge, and then we all have this reset. And I think it just adds a new element of competitiveness, which is what can we do with these cool new lists? How creative can we be? What cool interactions or broken combos can we find and explore and exploit that maybe other teams aren't aware of? And what can we do to anticipate the meta and get ahead of it? Do we think people are going to play the same old lists? Is there going to be new hotness available? And how can we balance those things? So I think it gives us a lot of really interesting things to do from a competitive point of view that otherwise also wouldn't have been available.
Yeah. Do you read minds?
You have the same thoughts?
Yeah, exactly the same. That's weird.
So I'm aware that I'm in a minority, and yes, we've had these discussions both within the Lions chat, and me and Tomasz have had these discussions as well. And I've had it with a lot of people because I have a differing opinion, and I'm well known for being grumpy and loud about my opinions. And I see your side of the argument. I absolutely do. But my nightmare scenario is we go into the WTC, someone has found something that's just broken, it's not gone through a CID, and instead of the team which has the best players, the best preparation, and the highest skill winning, and maybe the good amount of training, instead we could see more randomness, more chance, more meta guessing, and that kind of thing having a higher impact than I would like it to. I want the WTC to be a representation of the highest skill, training, preparation, and experience in the world. And I think that this takes away from that a little bit.
Adaptation is also a skill, and list building is a part of this game. So what I think it really does for WTC is just adding another dimension and forcing the players and the teams to be more complete.
I absolutely accept that adaptation is a very important skill, and that as Patrick said as well, that meta prediction is also a skill and something that teams should look to capitalize on. Especially in the new environment. And I also absolutely accept that it is a weakness of mine as a player to adapt to new things quickly. I usually take time and preparation to do that, and it will definitely not benefit me. And of course, that weighs in on my opinion. I'm not claiming to be unbiased in the slightest. But I also felt like my opinion was valid enough to be aired, in spite of the fact that I'm aware it's a minority view.
Oh, for sure. Sure, we don't all have to feel the same way about these things.
Yeah. I mean, like, if it was just me being a grumpy fucker, which has absolutely happened in the past, then I think I would probably just shut up about it, because I would realize that nobody agrees with me. But I don't think I'm alone here. And as I say, because it's had such an impact on my local meta, which was, as you say, sad and unfortunate, and hopefully will reverse. I've just got a guy come to me and say, hey, I'm looking to go a bit more competitive. Could you come and have some training games with me, coach me a little bit? Maybe we'll, get together with some opponents, and if they'll allow it, you can sit and coach me during games with sort of equal skilled opponents. And I'm really excited about that. So I'm hoping that that'll maybe have a chance to kickstart the local meta back into action. And I'm hoping that the positivity of the changes themselves will bring players back, and that these changes will revert. But the fact that it's happened in the first place has made me a bit sad, and I feel like it could have been avoided. That's all I wanted to say about that. So the last thing we got before we leave, and we will keep this brief because I realise we've been going a hell of a long time, and I do apologise for keeping you so long, but it's WTC predictions. So we're going to go with 2 predictions each of things that you think we're going to see plenty of at WTC. So, Tomasz, we'll start with you. What 2 things do you think we're going to see at WTC that we weren't seeing previously in the meta?
That we haven't seen.
I mean, it could just be a variation. So if you think something's going to change a bit and we're going to see that instead. But, like, for example, don't tell me that we're going to see Dreamer with Clockatrices, because, yeah, of course we are.
Can I go second?
No, you can't go second. I've nominated you. That's you don't get time to think. You just have to pop out what comes to your head. What do you think?
Nothing comes to my head.
All right, I'll let you go second. Pat, what do you think? Anything that you think we haven't seen before that might pop up as a result of these theme changes?
I think we could see tons. I think one thing we'll see for sure is we'll see the traditionally powerful themes, but in new configurations, and in particular, the way that theme forces used to work is they incentivize you either to take almost all warjacks or almost all infantry.
Yep.
And I think we'll see a move away from that towards more combined arms lists that are more well balanced and have a nice mix of both. So that's my first prediction.
Okay.
And then my second prediction is I think we'll see some wacky team compositions, considering all of the new options, and in particular the raft of new theme forces that let you play with models from different factions.
Yep.
Because I think that can do very interesting things to your team lineup. Mm-hmm. And potentially make your list present problems that your faction otherwise couldn't present. So, for example, last year, people thought, hey, Judicators are great, let's take 2 Menoth. Well, if they had that same thought this year, they don't need to take 2 Menoth anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe now there's that, Judicators are great, we need to present them as a problem, let's do a Menoth version and a Cador version.
Yeah.
So I think those mixed up lists could lead to a lot of really interesting options. Like, for example, this is pretty extreme and I don't think this is going to happen, but you could have 5 players get together and all decide to play Infernals. And they're like, yeah, let's just all just play our faction with the caster that plays in Infernals plus Infernals. And you could see some weird stuff happening as a result.
Yeah, you've opened up a world of skews that you could potentially tap into. My 2 predictions that we will see most teams choosing to pick tables. I think that was something that started to happen in the recent team tournaments that I've been to, but I think that's going to be big. So I think we're going to see more of that, because the scenarios and the terrain and so on, I think, are really impactful. So I think we might see that. And I think we're going to see a hell of a lot of that Scorn Minions theme. I'm nervous about that.
It does seem pretty strong, doesn't it?
I don't want to see that on the other side of the table. I mean, I really do, because I need to prepare for it now. But Yeesh. Those are my two. Tomasz, what you got?
Okay, so my prediction is that people are going to bring some crazy lists with crazy interactions that can deliver some crazy things, but during the tournament, someone will point out that those interactions don't work as those players thought they do. That's my prediction.
That someone's going to bring in some crazy shit and then find out it doesn't work.
Yeah.
All right, that's one, but I'm forcing you to go for two, so hit me with another one. What do you think?
I think we are going to see a lot of Kader Warjacks.
Really? In which context?
In the context of the new Jaws of the Walls theme benefit, which provides all the Warjacks with Pathfinder, because WTC terrain is huge and there's a lot of rough terrain that shuts down slow lists without Pathfinder. So now you can take all those warjacks, which are not easy to kill, very easy to play, and don't have the issue moving around the table.
Cool. That's a cool prediction. That's not something I would have immediately thought of, so that's exactly why I asked the question. That's great. Cool. Pat, many thanks for coming on, talking about the Irish, talking about your thoughts on Oblivion, and for spending so long with us. It's been a pleasure, as always.
It has. Thank you very much for having me.
And Tomasz, as always, an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Pat, for coming to the show. And it was an absolute pleasure to talk with you too. And thanks, Simon, for taking the role of a host for the episode.
Yeah, sorry, I think you originally started hosting it and then I just stole it from you. I got excited.
I have a massive headache, so it's fine by me.
Well, then, excellent news. One quick little thing before we go out. I've been asked to speak about a tiny little bit to introduce a vassal league. I don't know much about it, so I'm simply reading from a sheet here. But essentially, it looks like potentially the Line of Sight, Disciples of Agony, Dark Guidance, and Boosted Rolls are all collaborating to try and push forward this vassal league. For those who don't know what vassal is, it's a way of playing War Machine on the PC. It's not my favourite system, but it is the best system that exists for that sort of thing. And I know a lot of players really get a lot out of it, that it's really good for getting games in, especially if you have to travel to play or whatever, or if you have less time. So you can go and join this league. To give you an idea of what that will involve, it is a triad system. So you will bring 3 lists of 75 points. You cannot repeat Warlocks in those 3. There will be no Death Clock system, because it doesn't work very well with Vassal, so you'll just play the game as is, and it will be run over 2 to 3 months, depending on how many people they get, and they're looking at doing a round robin sort of top 4 from each pool system. Obviously, more info will become available as we move on. Important date is August the 9th, so your lists must be submitted before August the 9th, and you'll submit them via Conflict Chamber in an email a few weeks before this date, and the email address is warmahordes.vassal@gmail.com, and in the Muse on Minis link for this podcast you will find the link to the Discord as well. Have I missed anything anyone aware of?
No, it sounds good. I'm a big fan of Vassal, so I'm going to take part in that league if I can. It should be really fun. I'm really glad someone has finally gone to the effort to organise something like this for Vassal. It's much needed, because Vassal is really easy and convenient to play on, but it can be hard to find opponents. So thank you to whoever came up with this great idea. I really appreciate it. Also, Gen Con is before this date, right? So that should mean that we can use Oblivion rules and theme forces for this event. I
think that's the intention, and I absolutely mirror your gratitude to whoever organised this. I think I don't know exactly who it was. I think they got in touch with Tomasz, but it is a wonderful idea, and again, I really support it, and I hope that lots of people go and join and have a great time with the Vassal League. Right, it's time to sign off. Gents, it's been a pleasure. Have a good evening.
You too.
Yeah, bye.